We just finished up in the last video talking about a Han dwelling. Of course, this is a ceramic model of what a Han dwelling would have looked like because no Han dwelling has survived today. The Han dynasty fell in about 220 CE, and at that time China is split into 3 warring kingdoms, and they enter a period of chaos, which is called the Sixth Dynasty period. During this time, Confucianism loses a lot of its influence, most of its influence, and the Chinese elite turn to Taoism as a strong escapist element or philosophy. Buddhism spread from India to Central Asia, and then with the opening of the Silk Road, it spread to China. Amidst this chaos of the Sixth Dynasty period, which is also known as the period of chaos, Buddhism offered comfort in life and the promise of salvation in death, and it spread to all social levels in China. Thousands of temples and monasteries were built during this time. Surviving art from this period are hundreds of northern rock-cut caves. A lot of sculpture are found in caves like this one. Now, when we look at this image, what do we think it's depicting? Is it depicting a Buddha or a Bodhisattva? So take a second and kind of look at it, and you can push pause if that helps. If you guessed that it was a Buddha, you'd be correct. We know it's a Buddha because he's wearing this simple monk's robe. He has the elongated earlobes, but he does not have any earrings. We can't really see if he has that dot between his eyes, but we do see that he has that top knot, that usnisha on his head. This seated Buddha from Cave 20 was carved about 460 CE, and it was carved by imperial decree of a ruler of the Northern Wei dynasty. This is actually one of the dynasties that was the longest lived and most stable kingdom during this period. The front part of the cave has actually crumbled away, so it's kind of misleading when we look at it today because it looks like, oh, it's just kind of like a rock cut. But it actually would have originally been in a cave, but that part has fallen away today. But luckily, the sculpture has survived. It is a 45-foot statue and is now exposed to the open air. And it is, since it's so large, of course, it's visible from a distance. In addition to having those marks of the Buddha, he's also sitting in meditation. He's kind of interesting. It's different than the way that the Indians really express their image of Buddha. So here he is remote, he is austere, he's less human. Overall, he's more formal and unearthly. And it seems that the image of the Buddha changed from its depiction in India here to China. And in China, it really reflects the origins, that there's this fundamental difference between the way the Chinese and the Indians visualize their deities. To the left is another Buddha, and he is making that no fear gesture. And you'll actually watch a video on this. Behind these figures are Bodhisattvas. See him maybe over here. And here is just another image. You can see it's sort of like this weird reflection today. I have not been to this site, but I'm told there's some sort of like glass or plexiglass put over this Buddha to protect him since the cave fell down. But here is an image before that happened. The Tang dynasty emerged in 618 and lasted until 907 CE. During this time, the Chinese Empire expanded over Central Asia once again, and this is really one of the first greatest Chinese dynasties. It was considered very cosmopolitan and very tolerant. Tang China was confident in itself, and it was curious about the world around it. During this time, many foreign travelers came to the new capital, and they were often depicted in art of this period, as we can see here in this sculpture. This is a camel carrying a group of musicians, and it's from the mid-8th century CE. It's an interesting look of the Tang Dynasty's perspective on cultures outside of their own. What we see here is a depiction of 3 bearded musicians from Central Asia. 2 of the figures have smooth shaven, so like this guy and I believe this guy over here. And they are Han Chinese. It is also depicting a 2-humped camel, which is exotic to China, and it's from Central Asia, and it was a beast of burden on the Silk Road. The statue reveals a new interest in naturalism, and it's alive with gesture and expression in the musician's performance. You can see this guy has an instrument and he is playing it as they are traveling. Ceramics like this one were produced by the thousands for Tang tombs, so they're very popular. You can see lots of different versions when you look at them online if you do like a search for them. Buddhism reached its greatest development in China during the Tang Dynasty, and it was almost adopted by the entire country. A few structures do survive that were built before 1400. Such as this one. This is a temple from the Tang Dynasty. It's dated to about 782 CE. It's just a small hall constructed with a tiled roof that curves up. This style will become increasingly pronounced in later centuries. And it has those overhanging eaves supported by an elaborate bracketing system, which we discussed with that that ceramic model. Let's see if I can find it over here really quick. Here it is. With the Han Dynasty model. This is the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, and it is a temple, and it dates to about 645 CE, and then it was rebuilt in the 8th century, the mid-8th century. And it's an example of Tang architecture, and it was located in the Tang capital. It's actually built for this legendary monk. So when it was first built, it was built in honor of this legendary monk, and his name was Zhu Zeng. He is an interesting character. He went to India for 16 years, and he goes there on a pilgrimage. There he learns about Buddhism, and he translates a lot of the material that was written in India to Chinese so that people in China can read it and follow Buddhism. Now, it's kind of an interesting story because when the Chinese tell the story, or at least when you research stuff about this this pagoda, they speak very fondly of him. He is this great, this great guy who goes to India on this pilgrimage, and he brings back these sacred writings, and that way the Chinese can learn more about Buddhism. He's just this awesome figure. Then if you go and get the Indian perspective, they say, this guy came down here, we taught him about Buddhism, he took our sacred texts, he basically stole them, and he left and he went back to China. So it's kind of 2 versions of this story. Now the pagoda that we're looking at is a typical East Asian Buddhist structure, but it does have its origins in Indian stupas. So if we go here to this example, you can look at the transition between early stupas, and then here's a later stupa. This one's from Central Asia. Then it kind of combines these 2 forms. It's combining the stupa with the watchtower, and you're getting this pagoda form. So here's another image of the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, blending these 2 architectures. The Great Wild Goose Pagoda was built of masonry, but it imitates a wooden structure of the time. Its walls were decorated in low relief to resemble bays, and it has a bracket system, which is reproduced under the projecting roofs of each story. This has been remodeled several times. In this version we have 7 levels. Originally it had 5. Their goal for this building was to promote simplicity, symmetry, proportion, and grace. And this really is the essence of Tang architecture.
脚下在三江沿海，何所居？